welcome to the people of Tobago and citizens of Trinidad and Tobago by extension, and of course members of the media joining us via virtual platform. I bring you greetings from the capital of paradise, Scarborough, Tobago. And of course, it's a pleasure to once again address the people of Tobago as their Chief Secretary. Even as we battle these challenging times, as all of us know, pandemic has been impacting the world significantly since March of this year. And even before that, I think the first case was detected sometime in December. And therefore, it's almost a year now since we have been faced with this new normal as part of our circumstances. And as I speak, this pandemic remains a very grave threat to humankind. It continues to kill people, and it continues to ravage economies across the world. As a matter of fact, within recent times, a number of countries who had reopened their borders and relaxed some of their measures have now been forced to close again. And as I speak, there are approximately 52 million cases across the world, more than 1.2 million deaths so far, and approximately 14.2 million active cases. And therefore, all of us must recognize that we are still facing a very serious threat in this pandemic. And it is in that context that I want to communicate to the people of Tobago today, because of course all of us were happy across the country when the Prime Minister, in his blazer and a pretty shirt at the point in time, and I know across the country we have a code where we look at the Prime Minister's dress code and we try to predict whether or not measures will be relaxed, continued, or even whether they will be more strict going forward. But fortunately for us, there was some relaxation of the measures. Flights were added to the air bridge, and therefore more persons are likely to come to the island of Tobago at this time. To our great happiness as well, beaches were reopened across the country. And of course, many Tobagonians thus far has taken the opportunity to visit their favorite beach and once again enjoy the natural and pristine waters of Tobago and of course in other parts of the country. Within recent times as well, restaurants have been allowed to reopen and conduct some form of business. Cinemas as well have been allowed to reopen. And therefore we are on a path at this point in time towards progress where we are reopening our economy. And of course, once we continue to manage the situation as we have been doing, hopefully at some point in time very soon, we may be able to add additional flights to the air bridge, and of course additional capacity to the sea bridge. And therefore we can even have more tourist related and business related activities on the island of Tobago. And therefore, these are hopeful times, but I want to remind the people of Tobago that again, we are still in a pandemic, and therefore, even as we relax measures, and even as we gradually reopen the Tobago economy, we must continue to observe all the guidelines. And I was a bit disappointed when I saw some pictures coming out of one of the reef boat tours where I observed that persons were not following the guidelines or adhering to the restrictions. Restrictions designed to allow us to avoid the spread of this virus. Restrictions designed to allow us to continue on the path of relaxing the measures. Because the reality is that if we fail to act appropriately, chances are that we will once again have a spike in the number of cases, and then we will have no choice but to take the necessary actions to protect lives and, of course, to preserve our people in this country. And therefore, if we continue to operate contrary to the guidelines and contrary to the advised protocols, then we will likely lose the benefits and lose the gains that we were able to have over the last couple months. Of course, a few months ago there was a spike, and before that spike we were opened. All of us here in Tobago, we were happy because our domestic brothers and sisters from Trinidad were coming to the island in droves. They were staying at villas, they were staying at guest houses, they were going to our beaches, and they were spending money, purchasing food, right? And that allowed for economic activity on the island. And following that, we had a spike coming right after the general election, and therefore we were forced to close. And many persons were disappointed. It strained businesses significantly, and of course it placed a strain on all of us as individuals who were not able to go to the beaches, who could not go to the cinema to see a movie, who could not visit the gym or engage in many activities which we have grown accustomed to. But following the restrictions, we managed well, and we are here again. And therefore I want to appeal to the people of Tobago and to the people of this country to be more responsible. And to those businesses and business operatives within the tourism sector, please adhere to all the guidelines. Of course, here in the Tobago House of Assembly, we looked at our context, and the Tobago Tourism Agency Limited, in partnership with the Tobago House of Assembly, of course our health professionals, the county medical officer and others, and through much research and hard work, we developed a booklet which we titled The Tourism Industry Health and Safety Manual for COVID-19. And of course, this booklet is available at the Tobago Tourism Agency Limited. It has been widely distributed to hotels and even the airport and the Scarborough port, because we want to ensure that persons are aware of the necessary guidelines that we have put in place in terms of how we must conduct ourselves within the tourism sector, and of course generally across the island, even as we reopen. So again, I want to remind us that it is our willingness and our ability to be disciplined and to follow the guidelines, to wear masks, and to maintain the 50% capacity as advised or as instructed by law in the operations of our tours, our willingness to wash our hands and use hand sanitizers, our willingness to wear masks, our willingness to maintain the capacity restrictions in terms of transportation. Those actions are what will preserve our present circumstances and cause us to continue along a path of reopening and of course a removal of some of the restrictions that we have in place at this point in time. So of course I am quite happy as well that at this point in time here in Tobago, we have managed the situation to the point of having only one active case on the island. I am sure that at some point that will go to zero, but in order for us to continue to have that, we must manage ourselves and discipline ourselves and operate as though we are still in a pandemic, as we are. So I'm encouraging, and in many cases I'm instructing people here on the island to do what is right, do what is responsible, and do what will allow us to continue on this path to progress. In addition to that, there has been some confusion as it relates to the treatment of our public servants here in the Tobago House of Assembly. Those who have children, of course, schools are not open at this point in time. All learning is taking place via virtual platforms, and therefore in many instances mothers and fathers are required to give their children that kind of support. And therefore I want to announce that in the Tobago House of Assembly we are making provisions. All administrators were instructed to ensure that we make provisions and discuss with persons affected by those situations reasonable terms and flexible work arrangements to allow those persons to, of course, report for work from home when required, so that the attention needed by their children learning on those virtual platforms will not be sacrificed. And therefore that is expected to be enforced across all divisions and agencies of the Tobago House of Assembly. But I want to caution us as well that this arrangement must not be abused. I'm saying that parents should only utilize these arrangements if absolutely necessary. Of course, there may be some homes, or there are some homes actually, where there might be two parents, or in some cases parents, grandparents living in the same home that maybe can take turns in looking after the children on the virtual platforms. I'm saying all those considerations must be had. And of course, we in the Tobago House of Assembly, we will continue to provide the support to our public servants and of course to citizens and residents of this island, even as we navigate our way through these difficult circumstances. In addition to that, we continue to try our best to provide social support to those persons in need. Of course, food cards at the level of the Tobago House of Assembly continues to be provided to persons. Thus far, we have expended over $5 million on cards and other measures designed to assist persons going through these difficult circumstances. In addition to that, we want to ensure that our businesses here on the island are given the best chance, of navigating this period and surviving this period. And therefore, through our business development unit, thus far we have spent already over $10 million in business grants and business loans in support to many businesses on this island. And of course, a lot of those businesses are operating in the tourism sector that has been the hardest hit by this pandemic. So we continue to do what we must. Of course, the Division of Health, Wellness and Family Development continues to provide social and psychological support. There are hotlines in place for persons who are having a difficult time, navigating this difficult journey. Persons who may be depressed, persons who may simply need to talk to someone. All those hotlines are up and running and should be available 24/7. So we continue to provide the necessary support. We continue to do what we must to ensure that the resources of the island are managed in a particular way, so that the people of Tobago will continue to enjoy a decent quality of life, even in the midst of the most difficult circumstances. I want to reiterate to the people as well that despite our challenges, there is hope. We are still, in fact, a blessed people. I think we are in a very fortunate situation at this time in this country, where many other countries and jurisdictions are closing. We are enjoying some level of reopening. But as I said before, that can only continue if we act responsibly, and if we continue to follow all the guidelines and we continue to adhere all the laws and regulations that are designed to protect us during this pandemic. The final thing I will want to say before I take a few questions is that when I came into this office of the Chief Secretary in May, it seemed like a long time ago, but it's actually a very short time. One of the things that we tackled head on was the operations of the marine park. And of course, the beaches and the marine park was closed at the point in time, and we took the opportunity to begin to implement a user policy for the marine park. We had several meetings with all the stakeholders, the reef tour operators, boat owners, jet ski operators, as many stakeholders as possible. And by the time the marine park was reopened after the first lockdown, we had identified a path and a process for the effective and sustainable management of the marine space. But at the point in time, I signaled to the people of Tobago, especially those stakeholders, that in order for us to manage this space effectively, and not only that space down at the Buko Marine Park, but generally other sensitive marine spaces in the Tobago space, we had to get to the point of legislation. And therefore I want to say to the people of Tobago that after a long 3 months of hard work by our legal professionals within the Tobago House of Assembly and by persons from within the Division of Food Production, Fisheries and Fisheries, I almost said and the environment, but that has moved of course to infrastructure. So due to their hard work, of course, there was also a committee put in place to treat with this. We have gotten to the point of a draft bill. Of course, the Tobago House of Assembly Act 1996, Act 40 of 1996, gives the Assembly the authority to establish bills that, of course, once approved by the Assembly, will then go to Cabinet and then hopefully onto the Parliament, where it will become Tobago law. And of course, we have completed that draft bill, and that bill will be debated in the Assembly next week. And it is my hope that after it is passed by the Assembly, that it will get to the Cabinet and at some point in the very near future become law, so that we here in Tobago can manage that critical Buko Marine Park and other sensitive spaces, coral reef systems and other spaces that are valuable to us here in Tobago. Because of course, I think it was last week or week before, we were awarded the Manan Biosphere designation, and that signals to us as Tobagonians that we must continue to manage our environment in such a way that we can reap all the possible benefits. And I'm saying, apart from the obvious benefits to tourism, I think just us preserving those important aspects of our culture and history says something about us as a people. And therefore we must be cognizant of the fact that those spaces, our environment, is important to us, and we must ensure that by the time we leave this place, that future generations must inherit an environment that is, or that has been sustainably managed and that will continue to be preserved for many years to come. And therefore that bill will be debated next week, and I expect it to be passed and transmitted to the Cabinet for their consideration. So of course we continue to do what we must in the circumstances. I want to congratulate the people of Tobago, NGOs especially, and churches and even individuals who continue to do their best and who continue to give support to other Tobagonians going through difficulty in the form of psychological support, in the form of food and other kinds of support. I want to congratulate and thank them sincerely. And the final thing I will do is remind us that we are in this together, and that in this difficult period we must ensure that we continue to be our brother's keeper, so that no one is left behind. So at this point in time, I will take a few questions.
Thanks, Dennis. With the border still closed to the international market, a lot of focus has been placed on domestic tourism. Can you give us a sense as to, have you been receiving feedback as to how that has been impacting the economy so far, the Tobago
Well, the last time we were closed, of course, businesses were struggling at the point in time. Then, when there was that first reopening, there was a spike in activity, and the information that I got from most of the hoteliers is that some of them were sometimes as much as 80% in terms of their occupancy levels. So I think thus far there has been some response from the Trinidad market. Based on the pictures that I saw, the same ones that I mentioned earlier, there is some participation in reef tour operations. Of course, the capacity is restricted to 50%. So I think thus far persons are seeing some hope. Miss Williams,
Hi,
how are
good
you?
afternoon, Mr. Chief Secretary. I am fine. What I wanted to know from you is I know you spoke about the reef tour operators that were not obedient in light of COVID-19. What I wanted to find out from you is how recent was this act of disobedience? Where exactly did this take place? And was this tour operator warned?
Well, as I said, I saw it in a picture, so I'm not sure if the person was warned, but this took place, I think it was sometime last week, and in terms of the location, it was somewhere in the Bukom Marine Park.
Mm. Okay, thank you so
Yeah, so
much.
persons just simply need to follow the guidelines. Maintain the 50% capacity. I think there's a requirement to wear mask on the boats as well. Wear mask. Of course, you're free to go into the water now because beaches are reopened. So you're no longer restricted to watching fishes through the glass bottom and enjoying the ambience of the Bonaccord Lagoon or the Nylon Pool, but persons are now free to enter into the water. But please, by the time you get back to the boat, nothing is wrong with putting your mask back on to ensure that all of us are safe. Because all it takes is just one case in a hotel somewhere, and we have serious issues on our hands, which can lead to another lockdown. And I don't think anybody wants that to happen at this point in time.
Hi.
Yes,
Good
Mr. Clark.
afternoon. Yes, good afternoon to you, Mr. Dennis Clayton Clark, Radio Tambourine. Just following up on two slightly off matters. The last time you spoke at the press conference, the issue of the maxi taxi, the concessionaires, and we were informed that a High Court writ has been issued to the THA. They still have not responded, as according to reports reaching our station. And also, teachers, there was a court ruling in favor of teachers being paid by the THA. Can you just elaborate on if you have received that, or what's the response of the division?
Right, so
division on that matter?
So I did see the last one with respect to the teachers. Of course, that is not a new matter. The THA has been so instructed a while now. And one of the things we have done within the last few months is to establish a gratuity clearinghouse project. And the intent of that project is to ensure that across the board we treat with all gratuity issues as far as possible. My information is that some of those teachers have been paid their gratuity, and therefore that team continues to work feverishly to ensure that we process gratuity across the Tobago House of Assembly. And my information thus far is that we have made significant strides in that regard. So of course I will continue to follow up to ensure that all teachers, not just those who are part of that legal process, but all teachers and all members of staff across the assembly who has not been paid their gratuity, especially pre-2017, right? We are doing all in our power to ensure that those gratuities are processed. And as I said before, so far there has been significant strides as a result of this project. In terms of the first issue, I am not aware that any MOU was signed between the THA and PTSC as yet. My information is that it is still in its draft form. There are still discussions to be had. I know there was some issue of some contract being offered to maxi operators by PTSC. I am not aware that that contract was finalized. I think they were still in the process of discussing those matters. So that continues to be an issue engaging my attention and of course the attention of the Secretary of Education, and we hope to have some resolution soon outside the courthouse. Mr. Holder. Yeah.
Yes, good afternoon. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, sir.
Yes, Secretary, Chief Secretary, sorry. I have a couple of questions here. On the same issue with the Boku Marine Park, I know the strawberry tour operators would have mentioned to me before that they're not pleased with certain aspects of the policy. And one of those aspects is that they are asking to have to pay an annual user fee for each operator instead of having a pass, because they are afraid that the pass that is left up to the determination of officials within the THA could leave them open to possible victimization, because they're saying once...
Repeat the last part you said.
They say they believe that it could open them up to possible victimization. The pass, the issuing of the pass, because they say once the pass is an issue, you can't operate within the space at all. And they say if you have a fallen out with the officials, then they fear that they can revoke your pass. Would you like to answer that claim? And my second question is, there has been a bit of uneasiness by residents of the Glen Road area concerning the temporary prison. Can you say whether there were any consultations considering where they were going to put the temporary prison?
Right, so to answer the first question, of course the access pass is going to be implemented, and I think it has already been implemented as per the policy, and it will be part of the bill that I spoke about earlier. And once that bill is passed and becomes law, then an access pass to get into the marine park will be a legal requirement, and there will be some cost attached. And this is nothing new. A number of jurisdictions regulate their industry just like this. All, as a matter of fact, in Barbados, all tourism related businesses must have licenses in order to operate, right? And the licenses are not free. Of course, we have to continue to find ways to manage the park, to do the necessary research, and the assembly is responsible for that, and there is some cost attached. And the fee, based on my information, isn't going to be anything more than $1,000. It could even be less, $1,000 per year, right? So that is something I see it as a requirement, right? Of course, in order to get the pass, there are certain rules and requirements that boat owners and tour operators must comply with. For example, boats must be surveyed to ensure that they are safe, and of course they must ensure that the captains and other operatives on the vessel are adequately licensed to operate those vessels. So the pass is really a way for us to manage access to the park and to ensure compliance with safety measures for all boat owners and operators.
Second question I had concerning the
yes, the
temporary prison.
The prison. Of course, all of us will know that we are in a pandemic, and one of the biggest threats really is a breakout within the prison population. And I think earlier, I think it was about 2 months or so ago, there was in fact a breakout within the prison where there were a number of cases. And in order to manage that, we recognized that in the Tobago space, we had to identify a location in order to treat with prisoners who may come into contact with the virus. The same thing is being done in Trinidad, and we want to ensure that within the prison system we have the same parallel system, so that you have a separation of those prisoners who might be positive away from persons who are not ill with the virus. And therefore there were some discussions at the level of the chief administrator, the chief medical officer, and prison officials, and a decision was taken to identify 2 buildings within the Glen Road area as a district prison. Of course, Section 5, I think it is, of the Prison Service Act gives the Attorney General of this country the authority to designate and identify a police station or other building as a district prison in this country that will have the necessary facilities to accommodate prisoners. So that has been done in the Glen Road scenario. I must say that the process could have been better, because my information is that there was not enough consultations, if any at all, with the persons residing in the community, and therefore I understand their concerns, and I want to apologize to them for the lack or the apparent lack of sufficient consultations. But again, we are in a pandemic, and certain decisions have to be taken urgently to ensure that we not only preserve our population, but of course the prison population as well, who are in fact human beings just like all of us, and deserve the same kind of respect and the same kind of treatment with respect to preserving their lives from this pandemic, or from the effects or the possible effects of this pandemic. Mrs. Thompson Forbes.
Hi, good afternoon, Chief.
Hi, how are you going?
I have two questions. My first question, members of the hunting fraternity here in Tobago, they are wondering if any representation is being made on their behalf, because we know hunting is maybe a single man or a dual person sport. So they are wondering what is happening in their regard, and if you are making any representation for them in light of with the COVID guidelines. That's one. And my second question, and this is in relation to the consolidation of all the THA companies on the island, Tico Suave, Fipcot, and also Cassava Products. Can you give us an update on that, please? Thanks.
Right. So the first question, I too am missing bushmeat, especially tattoo, and therefore I look forward to the resumption of the hunting season at some point. However, I want to say again that we are still in a pandemic, and therefore things have to be managed in a particular way, and therefore some activities that we would love to do at this point in time, we simply cannot. As I speak, I think it was last week, some persons were calling for the borders to be reopened. Others were calling for bars to be open. But we have to operate with sense. We have to demonstrate the kind of leadership that is required of us at this point in time. And therefore, we will continue to rely on the medical advice and determine which activities will be permissible at this point in time. And at this point, hunting is simply not one of those activities. In terms of the TADCO arrangements, no, I do not have all the information with respect to an update at this time. I know the board and the transition team continues to do their work to ensure that all that is needed to take place in terms of the accounting issues and all the other issues, the human resource issues, are treated within a particular manner so that we can have a successful launch of this new company. So I know that all the work continues. Actually, I visited Tico Suave last week, I think it was, where I met with some of the officials there. I also met with the Secretary of Food Production and the chairman of the new TADCO board, and some other officials who are involved in the process. Of course, there are some challenges. In some cases, persons are playing the fool. But I think generally we are going to get past those challenges and get this thing up and running by the early part of next year. All right, Mr. Holder.
Yes, me again. I have a couple more questions for you. 3 questions actually. Recently, some farmers complain about access roads in Mount St. George. The rains came on and basically cut them off from accessing the farm or getting out of the farm. Can you just speak towards the access road program and particularly the work being done in Mount St. George I know you've taken a particular liking towards agriculture. Secondly, we have had a perennial problem of power outages across the island. Sometimes it's island-wide, sometimes it's in local areas. Has the Assembly taken notice of the issue, and have they begun to have discussions or tackle the issue in any kind of way? And finally, Mr. Fali Augustine of the PDP, he would have mentioned that he estimates the elections to be called for sometime in mid-January. Can you speak to the correctness of Mr. Augustine's estimates?
All right, to answer the last question first, the date is somewhere on my person. I'm not sure if it's the back or the front pocket. The second question, remind me of the second question. I'll go to the first one because I remember that one. In terms of access roads, yes, I'm aware of there were actually farmers at 2 locations who were trapped on their farms. A few farmers were trapped in the Goldsboro area, and of course Mr. Jeremiah George as well in Mount St. George. So I've spoken to both the Secretary of Infrastructure and the Secretary of Food Production, and I've instructed them to treat with those 2 issues immediately to ensure that our farmers are able to access their farms safely. And you see, the reason why I gave instructions to have it done immediately is that because those 2 areas are areas that are accessed by many farmers. In Goldsboro, I think they have an association with over close to 40 members, 20 something of them active. And then you may have other farmers in that area who may not even be part of the association. And therefore, these are active farming districts, and we want to ensure that farmers who are serious have predictable and safe access to their farms. And we really don't want a situation where persons may go to their farms in sunlight, and because of a change in the weather, they are trapped there for several hours, as happened. So I've instructed, as I said before, the Secretary to treat with those issues immediately so that we take the necessary action in those 2 locations to ensure that we do not have farming or farmers operating in that area having to risk their lives when trying to get home or even get to their farms. Remind me of the second question, please.
The second question was concerning the power outages on the island.
Yes.
And whether
so yeah, that is a serious concern of mine, and TNTEC simply needs to get their act together. I met with the Minister of Public Utilities last week, and that was one of the areas that we discussed. I expressed my severe dissatisfaction with what has been happening on the island with respect to power outages. It simply cannot continue. Of course, we have children at home during the day, learning online, right? Trying to get an education in these difficult circumstances. And sometimes in the middle of the day, we are having power outages. And that simply should not happen in this age and in this day. And therefore, I have asked the minister to treat with that as a priority. I also had some discussions with the management of TNTEC concerning this issue, and I expect quick resolution to it.
Secretary, Chief, I just have one more follow-up question. Did they, when you had the discussions with TNTEC, did they tell you about the nature of the problems they're having?
No, they didn't shed light on the specific issues they were having. As a matter of fact, at that meeting, it was the introduction of a new area manager, and I did indicate that that continues to be a challenge and that they need to treat with it. Yeah, I am not an engineer per se, so I tend not to get involved in terms of the details of the issues. It is a challenge, and they have to do what is required to fix it.
Thank you.
Mrs. Thompson Forbes.
Yes, Chief, just a follow-up. I know that members of staff of TECOSWAF would have written you with some grave concerns that they had in relation to the consolidation. have you responded? And if not, when do you intend to respond to the employees or meet with them? And when will these matters be resolved? Because persons are indeed worried.
So as I said, I went to Tikoswav compound last week, and I carried the Secretary of Food Production, the chairman of TATCO, and I did almost a complete tour of the facility. I visited the sales department, I visited the feed shop, I visited the cold storage area, and I had a chat with several of the staff members, so I understand the concerns. And I said, as I said before, quite frankly, some persons are playing the fool and causing this process to be more frustrating and more complicated than it should be. But I expect that persons will do what is required as their professional duty to get this done and to get it done properly. So I will continue to have discussions with the persons involved. I will continue to hear as well from the staff members and individuals that might be affected. And as I said, just as they wrote to me citing their concerns, I ensured that I went there for myself to see what was happening. So I have quite a clear understanding of what some of the challenges are. And as I said before, some persons are playing the fool. Fool is not the word I really want to use, but so if no further questions, let me take this opportunity to thank all of you, members of the media, and of course those who were listening and following on Facebook and other social media platforms, and to once again encourage all of us that though the journey at this point in time may be rough and challenging, our challenges are only temporary, and once we do what is required of us, once we continue to observe the guidelines, and I want to encourage all operatives, businesses, tour operators, hotels, ensure you have a copy of this document. There is in fact some very sound and reliable advice based on data and based on research that will allow us the best chance, once we follow the guidelines, to continue to proceed through this period with a very minimal level of infections, if any at all. So once again, thank you very much and have a good afternoon.